In a particular section in the novel White Teeth by Zadie Smith, we have the narrator making a significant statement about a group of children playing in a London suburb. The lines go like this. This has been the century of strangers, brown, yellow, and white. This has been the century of the great immigrant experiment. It is only this late in the day that you can walk into a playground and find Isaac Leong by the fish pond, Danny Rahman in the football cage, Kwang O'Rourke bouncing a basketball, and Ivory Jones humming a tune. Children with first and last names on a direct collision course. Names that secrete within them mass exodus, cramped boats and planes, cold arrivals, medical checks. This description of a London playground gives us an insight into the hybridized world of London that the novel takes us into. This mixture of a situation is in fact one of the themes of Zadie Smith's first novel, White Teeth. It is a theme that uh, incorporates the legacy of empire, the coming together of immigrants in the old imperial centers, and the multicultural societies that are thereby produced. The White Teeth has rightly been considered as a multivocal, multicultural, multi-generational tale that brings together different ethnic groups, faiths, and families. A novel that is set in post-imperial London, it is a complex work featuring multiple locations, time frames, and characters. Zadie Smith is one of the significant voices in English literature, a person who has made her mark as a novelist, short story writer, and currently as an essayist and a critic, a literary or a cultural critic of great repute. She entered the literary scene at a very young age. She was only in her early 20s when she published her first work, when her first work, novel, White Teeth, was published. Well, one can look at her in the context of the literature of the 1990s and early 2000s. One thing that can be said about the literary works, particularly the novels of the 1990s and early 2000s, is that it's a mixture of various voices and styles. There is no one predominant quality that characterizes novels of this age. These novels were experimental and realistic at the same time, high and low at the same time, sometimes monumental and of epic proportions, but at the same time, uh, you know, incorporating the grotesque. But one must also mention the fact that the novels were not entirely apocalyptic as one would expect them to be. In fact, you find, on the other hand, a very strong voice of hope in many of the novels of this age. Uh, One can almost feel with the novelist Foster Wallace, the fact that true empathy is, in fact, not um, impossible in today's world. A piece of fiction, he says, can allow us imaginatively to identify with a character's pain. And this is something that is nourishing and redemptive. And one writes, says Foster Wallace, to become less alone inside. Zadie Smith is often considered as one of the first novelists of hysterical realism. Hysterical realism was a term coined by the critic James Wood to particularly describe the kind of novels written by Zadie Smith. He saw it as a literary genre that was marked by a strong contrast between elaborately absurd prose, plotting, and characterization on the one hand, and on the other hand, a careful, detailed investigations of real, specific social phenomena. So he actually used the term in a derogatory manner to denote the contemporary conception of the big, ambitious novel, he says, that pursues vitality at all costs. And consequently, according to him, these kind of novels know 1,000 different things, but they do not know a single human being. So you have, according to him, in hysterical realism, a great deal of realism, but then it does not serve any human purpose. So it's just a lot of sound and fury in the form of detailed, realistic descriptions of many things, but ultimately they do not amount to much. So it was particularly with regard to white teeth that James Wood um, leveled this charge of hysterical realism. He says, hysterical realism is something that not only imitates the world around it too closely, but it also confuses motion for vitality and narrative acrobatics for emotional complexity. In other words, there's a great deal of narrative acrobatics, a great deal of experimentation with style, and a great deal of realistic description of many things, but there is no, it cannot convey any emotional complexity. You have a great deal of catalogs of facts, but uh, that is not the drama of knowing. And the conventions of realism are not abolished, but on the contrary, they are exhausted. And according to James Wood, the hysterical novelist was a failure, not at the level of verisimilitude, but morality. In other words, you have a great deal of realism and verisimilitude in their works, but you do not find much of the human in these works. It reproduces the chaos that it hoped to resist, replacing meaningful self-discovery with the solitudes of self-consciousness. And to repeat what he said, it knows 1,000 different things, but not a single human being. Now, Zadie Smith was very much aware of this um, tag that had been attached to her work, and she herself described hysterical realism as a painfully accurate term for the sort of overblown, manic prose to be found in her own novel, White Teeth. She was one of the very few writers who actually gave a negative review for her own novel, and later, as a more mature writer, she's often felt, she says, extremely self-conscious about the way in which she wrote White Teeth. James Wood describes the hysterical realist novel, the big contemporary novel as a perpetual motion machine that appears to have been embarrassed into velocity. He says it seems to want to abolish stillness, almost as if it is ashamed of silence. And to do that, you have stories and sub stories sprouting on every page. And these novels continually flourish their glamorous congestion, he says. So he sees that as a major lack or problem with these novels. And inseparable from this culture of permanent storytelling. There is so much of storytelling, so much of narration in these novels that um, there is a kind of excess of storytelling, and that has in a way become a kind of shrouding a lack, hiding, screening a kind of lack. And that lack, according to James Wood, is the human. He says, this is not magical realism, it is hysterical realism. Storytelling has become a kind of grammar in these novels. It is how they structure and drive themselves on. The conventions of realism are not abolished, but on the contrary, exhausted and overworked. In other words, there's too much of realism. Appropriately, then, objections are not made at the level of verisimilitude, but at the level of morality. This style of writing is not to be faulted because it lacks reality, but because it seems evasive of reality while borrowing from realism itself. It is not a cock-up, but a cover-up. So there is a great deal of lack in these novels, according to James Wood. You can click on the link given here and read the James Wood article of the year 2000 titled Human All Too Inhuman on the formation of a new genre, hysterical realism. Well, in spite of the fact that critics like James Wood dismissed the novel as a hysterically realist novel, the fact remains that White Teeth was an instant hit when it came out. It received very positive reviews and good readership, and also won some of the prestigious prizes uh, awarded for novels. It's a novel that straddles the past and the present and conveys how the present is so rooted in the past and that the past is something that just cannot be shaken away. The multicultural present of England is firmly rooted in its colonial past. This seems to be the idea that is conveyed in the novel, as also in a quotation from Shakespeare's Tempest that Zadie Smith places at the very beginning. According to this line from the Tempest, what is past is prologue. The past is the prologue to the future. And that is how the novel emerges as a vibrant canvas, portrait of contemporary multicultural London. And she conveys this story not through characters whom we would typically or whom we would call, the typical English characters, but these are characters drawn from a wide diversity of backgrounds from three ethnically diverse families. So she writes about time and place, identity, history getting repeated, and the persistent legacies, that constantly haunt our present selves, and also the futures that, in a way, rush towards us. The novel is set in the working class suburb of Willesden in northwest London. Willesden is the area that Zadie Smith herself grew up in, and therefore one can see a lot of uh, probably autobiographical elements in the novel, the kind of experiences that she would have encountered as a half Jamaican, half British girl growing up in London around the turn of the new millennium, in exactly the same way that Irie Jones in the novel grows up. The novel chronicles the life of an odd couple, two friends, a white man, a British gentleman named Archie Jones, who was generally considered as a failure in life and who decides his destiny, not with any grand, you know, um, act of choice or anything, but with flips of a coin that he always carries. And Samad Iqbal, who is a Bengali Muslim who struggles to fit into British society and who also at every turn in his life has to remind everyone that he is not an Indian. He is in fact a Bangladeshi. The fact that India has been divided into Pakistan and then Bangladesh is something that eludes everyone's grasp, and so he continues to be treated as an Indian. Yeah, so the novel, as has already been discussed, uses a predominantly realist form. We do not have the kind of postmodern magical realism that we might encounter in other novels written around this time. It sticks to a realist form, and that is how the novelist explores the melting pot or the multicultural makeup of contemporary Britain. She's particularly interested in the way that identities are formed in the present and how they are influenced by the inherited discourses. Modern day England is what it is because of its past of imperialism and colonialism. When we discuss a post-colonial novel, we normally discuss works that are written by people from the colonies. But here is somebody who wants to highlight the fact that the colonizer, that country itself has changed a great deal, and its history just cannot be written today unless it takes into account its colonial and imperial past. And therefore, the span of the novel is huge. It covers some 58 years, all the way from the Second World War to the turn of the new millennium. But it also, in parts, takes us back to the very first war of Indian independence, the 1857 war, which it was soon after that war that India became a part of the British Empire. So that bit of history has a big say in British history today. So do read the novel, voluminous as it is, and if it is, too time consuming, do try to watch the TV show based on the novel. It is a 4-part series, and a series that shows much sincerity to the original. It hasn't diverged from it, it hasn't changed the script. And you can see the saga of the three families, the Joneses, the Iqbals, and the Chalfins, unfolding in the 4 episodes of this series. If you want, you may also go through a good summary of the novel. The links to the video, the TV show, and the summary are provided in this slide. So in this slide and the next 2 ones, we'll take a look at the characters, the major characters who appear during the course of this novel and whose intertwined stories, the novel unfolds for us. So this is the second generation, the one that's going to be the future too. And um, we see how intertwined their lives are. Irie Jones is a person who's in many ways connected to the twins Majid Millett and also to Joshua Chalfin. And as we all know, the present in the novel is what it is because of the past. And the past here takes us back to the days of England's imperial presence in the Caribbean islands, where you have Irie's uh, grandmother, great grandmother, in fact, Ambrosia Bowden, um, made pregnant by her English tutor, Captain Charlie Durham, and then also raped by Sir Edmund Flecker Glenard. You know, the the character after whom the school in which these children, Irie, Millet, and Majid study, and also Joshua study, is named. That school is named after Sir Edmund Flecker Glenard. So it is a continuation of that. You know, whatever is taught in the English schools that educate the children of these British people happens to be one that is a direct descendant of the imperial age. The point of view in the novel is that of the third person omniscient narrator, and this allows the author to give us an insight into the minds of the characters and to tell us how their lives are intertwined. You know, the as readers, we are therefore given access to the thoughts, the feelings, and the experiences of a whole lot of characters. Even though we find shades of Zadie Smith in Irie Jones, it is not just Irie Jones's point of view or perspective that we have here. It is that of the third person narrator. And the time frames in the novel, you know, that's another significant feature of the novel. A large part of the novel is narrated in the past tense. And as we know, it takes us back all the way back to the 1850s, you know, and the First War of Independence, and then the Second World War, and then the 1970s, you know, from the 19 years or year of 1975, where the events in the novel begin. And then in the last chapter, we have the 31st of December 1992. That is the single day on which the present activities of the final or events of the final chapter unfold. And therefore, by constantly shifting between the past tense and the present, the author then again gives us or ties together all the divergent threads in the last chapter. The present as something that is made up of all the roots, the rhizomatic roots, or the past connections that it has in different ages, different time, different places, and different cultures. The title is something that appears, you know, the white teeth, they reappear as a recurrent symbol in the novel. In the first place, you know, white teeth, they symbolize identity because, you know, it is something, you know, from in the very title, the author is here is actually inviting our attention to the question of identity, pointing out how, irrespective of the caste or the color or the creed or the nation or the age that we belong to, every human being has a set of white teeth. So it is in fact a marker of identity. And just as teeth have roots, not a single taproot, but you know, a network of roots, personal identities are rooted in the past, and the network of the past is the prologue to the present, as she highlights in that quotation that she takes from Shakespeare's play Tempest. And like identity, teeth also undergo profound changes as a result of experiences in life. Each one of the sections in the novel and the various chapters are in fact titled with the analogy of the tooth. We have um, titles like the root canals of Archibald Jones, the root canals of Mangal Pandey, and then the canines, the root canals of Hortense Bowden, the and so on. So the teeth imagery is constantly there throughout the novel, and the teeth also invite our attention to the cultural norms that are accepted in the society that this novel is set in, with its very clear connections to the era of colonization. You have the character Hamilton, when the um, children, Millet, and Irie, take the uh, harvest festival offerings to various houses. They happen to visit the house of one Mr. J.P. Hamilton, who, you know, uh, it treats them like these colored children. Obviously they do not belong to his race, and he has absolutely no regard for them, and it is he who engages in this conversation or teaches them about the whiteness of teeth, and how he says the white teeth of the natives that he encountered in Congo and other such places actually gave them away. It was because of the whiteness of their teeth that people like him were able to shoot in the darkness and kill the natives. Even when the natives were probably trying to ward off the enemy, the whiteness of their teeth gave them away. So, in other words, the white teeth again takes us back to the roots of colonization, which was an event which happened and which brought with it a great deal of racial discrimination, in spite of the root truth that we are all, after all, human beings. So the kind of cultural norms that this kind of colonial past, this kind of imperial past has established in the society, that is what the novel constantly refers to. And the characters in the novel, sometimes they resist these norms, sometimes they embody these norms. In any case, these cultural norms, which are perpetrated by the imperial past, are very much a salient feature of today's England. There is no shaking it off. Whether you're an English person, whether you are a person of hybrid and a race, whether you belong to you're half Jamaican and half English, whether you are a pure Indian or a not so pure Indian, uh, your present and your future is something that is defined and shaped in various ways by the past, the colonial past that you have inherited. To conclude, then, let us take a look at the novel as the work of a woman writer. How can we make a feminist reading of the novel? How do we know that the novel is often considered as a prime example of a multicultural novel. It is, as has been already analyzed, considered as a good example of hysterical realism. But over and above that, the novel is basically one that is written by a woman. And it is a woman rewriting the history that uh, she and others like her have always been kept away from. So the historiography from a woman's point of view. And this is where the character of Irie becomes significant. Uh, very much like we relate the history of the world as the history of men, the rulers, the emperors, the major decision makers, the powerful leaders. They have all been men. And in this society that the novel invites our attention to, the past is, of course, predominated by people like Archie and Samad Iqbal. Even though they are not exactly what we conventionally understand as heroes or, successes and inspiring role models, it cannot be denied that the story is theirs. But then you have the emergence of the girl. And the character of Irie is very significant because through a character of Irie, we not only see the struggle of a second generation immigrant, with her and mixed parentage, mixed ancestry, and so on, but also the struggle of a woman in a contemporary society searching for her authentic self and the future that she wants to create for herself. So, this search for identity, for one's future, is what the novel ultimately emerges to concern itself with. The way Zadie Smith presents multiculturalism in the novel is, one of its the significant features. Multiculturalism is here treated as something that is constantly evolving. It is transient. It's not fixed, or it's not a concrete, watertight concept. History is seen as something that is fluid and evolving. Multiculturalism is in a similar manner seen as transient. It goes beyond the national boundaries. It moves towards the transnational. And at every point in the novel, we are reminded of the fact that it is something that is likely to change, likely to be interpreted and reinterpreted in ever so different ways. And the whole concept of being multicultural is not seen as just a region that is full of people of differing backgrounds. That is there, but beyond that, it moves beyond that. It moves towards a kind of inclusivity. It moves towards a transition. There is a transition towards tolerance, and that move towards that tolerance, that ability to exist in a transnational way, that is what is conveyed largely through the character of Irie. She is, it is through this young girl's character that, this growing up girl's character, that Zadie Smith uh, conveys her understanding of the English standards, or that society standards of gender and race. It is through Irie's interactions with the other characters, both men and women, that we realize the hollowness of gender and race conceptions or perceptions. Gender standards, for example, include ideas about remaining very thin, dieting and remaining thin, being straight, being strong, but also submissive, and being available for, or being available to maintain patriarchal expectations, fulfilling or meeting patriarchal expectations. And in the way that she constantly fails to do that, um, Zadie Smith presents to us the hollowness of these kind of gender expectations. Similarly, the racial standards, the standards that we have, the stereotype notions that we have regarding race, the very rigid compartmentalized notions that we have regarding white and black and so on. Again, it is, I think, subverted through the character of Irie. We have Irie, who at one point of time harbors the notion that to be desirable to others, and one has to have not hair, curly, kinky hair like hers, but straight hair. She goes to get her hair straight, and we see how that turns out to be a comedy of errors. Her hair gets burnt, and when she attaches extensions with straight hair, it just comes out. And similarly, her the her looking up to the Chalfins as role models. She considers them to be the typical white people. But it's, as we realize later, they themselves are not pure British people. They are also a family of immigrants. So the gender and racial norms that we blindly adhere to are totally subverted through the various experiences that Irie has in the novel. So one can say that it is through the performativity of Irie's character that Zadie Smith questions the normativity of the society in which she lives. It is a society that keeps prescribing norms. It inherits it from the past, and in spite of all the changes that have come about, we continue to perpetrate racism and sexism, and this normativity is what is constantly problematized through the performativity that is attributed to Irie's character in the novel. These kind of norms extend to writing also. And we have Zadie Smith, who has time and again expressed in her writings, in her prose writings and in her interviews, that it's very important for women, women writers. She speaks up for women writers, that women writers need to feel that they are the subjects, they are the doers of the action, they are the writers, they are the people who are doing the writing, and they should not continue to remain as objects who are looked at, judged and observed by other people. And it is through this daring new work, with its take on history, with its very satirical presentation, with its humor and subversive situations, that Zadie Smith is creating a space for herself in the canon of British literature. She does not have too many you know models in the past among women writers, women who have um, engaged with the broad sweep of history, women who have engaged with history in a subversive manner, women who have experimented with humor and parody and satire. So therefore it is a bold new voice, and it is therefore a kind of uh, setting herself free, creating a space for herself, and thereby paving a way for other writers too. It's a kind of historical writing, cultural writing, gendered writing, and a combination of all of these, which makes it an authentic voice. So we can see a lot of parallels, not just between Irie's character and that of Zadie Smith, with regard to their growing up, their ancestry, and their experiences, but the very characterization of Irie and the role or Zadie Smith's writing. That is where I think you have the closest parallel. Zadie Irie is a character who does not fit into any of the constricting norms. She is not very thin, she's not fair, she does not have straight hair, she gets pregnant outside marriage, and you cannot identify the father of the child with any certainty. These are the kind of constricting norms that a community or a society normally builds around a woman and a woman who belongs to another race. And she does not, her herself is not one that is defined by the society. She looks for a search. She searches for a self beyond what she is expected to be. And in a similar manner, here is Zadie Smith, who writes or whose quest for her style uh, is not one that is tethered to any roots. She does not write in the way a woman is conventionally expected to do. She does not stick to the kind of themes that a woman writer is normally seen to engage with. She does not present things in the way that women writers have been observed to be doing down the years. The language, the style, the themes, the characterization, the sanctity, all of these are different. So it is in that way that the authenticity of Zadie Smith's writing can be considered as a major point towards considering this novel as a good example of women's writing in the in the present. Iris, her name, it's a Caribbean name chosen by her mother, Clara. It's a patois word which means okay and peaceful. And that is exactly what she is at the end. She is okay and peaceful with her life. She's made a choice and she has decided to live life on her own terms. So just as Irie accepts herself, her body, her color, and her roots, and uh, reaches a stage where she is okay with everything and attains peace, we can consider Zadie Smith as her writing this novel as creating her own space, using the novel, the genre of the novel, as a woman writer to engage with history, to use it uh, in her own way, to use language in her own way, and creating a multicultural, transnational space in the genre of the novel. So she in a way recreates the genre of the novel for women and for women of color and for um, minorities in general. And it is through the character of Irie Jones largely that this novel engages in this journey towards the search for authenticity.